justice to the topic. We have Professor Wole Soyinka laureate, who gives a sort of reflection as guest of honor, a reflection cum goodwill message. We also have right here with us our own professor at large of strategic studies, former staff, former minister of the Interior Federal Republic of Nigeria, in the person of General Dr. Abdurrahman Dambaso. He will be looking at the topic of today from the perspective of military training and doctrine. We also have Professor Chris Imafidon in the United Kingdom. He is a mentor to scholars across the continent and an advisor to various governments on educational matters. He will be looking at the topic from the perspective of countering extremism through mass education. We also have Professor Tunde Agara. He is our own Dean of College of Arts and Social Sciences and former director of the Center for Strategic and Development Studies of Ambrose Ali University. You will be tackling the theme of discussion from the angle of social research. We also have, from far away India, Professor Pariksha Singh. He was former dean of the College of Tourism and Hospitality, Punjab Technical University, and he holds different high positions at the University of Jammu, both in India presently. He has an interesting dimension of looking at the theme. He will look at countering extremism through tourism. That's going to be his own perspective. Also, we have Nancy Yamut, the only lady among us for this discussion. She's a forensic and psychosocial counselor and the Director General of Rescue Me, an NGO that deals with rehabilitating prisoners who have who found themselves in prison because they were involved in extremism of diverse kinds. She is going to share her experience in partnering with United States Agency for International Development. She has won a lot of grants in the quest to rehabilitate extremists who are in prison so that they don't return to extremism. Last, but by no means the least, we have a reserve officer of the British Army and a top-rate consultant in matters of counterinsurgency, risk management, terrorism, and what have you, in the person of Captain Xi Di Ueno. He is going to be sharing his experience in Iraq and Afghanistan. He has seen action fighting extremists in Iraq and Afghanistan as an officer of the British Army. And he will be relating his experience to our ongoing counterinsurgency efforts. So we have a loaded team. And to set the ball rolling, I'll be inviting Vice Chancellor Professor Lawrence Ikechukwu-Ezemoye, a professor of repute, visiting professor to University of Lancaster in the United Kingdom. Talk of conflict and related issues. You will have to, before you count 5, you must see as far as this continent is concerned. He will be giving us his opening address. Vice Chancellor, sir.
Thank you very much, Dr. Femi, the moderator, for this very important webinar. It's an honor for me to chair this international webinar with great minds as panelists. You can imagine the delight and joy to chair a panel where you have our Nobel laureate, Professor Wole Soyinka, as our guest of honor, and indeed with the former Chief of Army Staff, an academic in his own right, an officer and a gentleman, talking about General Dr. Dambazu, who is also a professor at large at this university, on the panel. We also have international scholars, Peace Corps professionals in the area of peace building that are on this panel. So I'm really delighted to host this webinar in Igbinedion University under the Center for Contemporary Security Affairs. This is part of the series of webinars and program of the center. This webinar is on the role of the academia in countering extremism. It will bring to fore an opportunity to interrogate the nexus around the academia, peace building, and extremism. So I use this opportunity to welcome all our participants watching and participating via Zoom. That we have a large population from almost all the continents of the world, understandably so, because no nation is free from conflict. And there is also no nation in this continent that does not desire peace. As I welcome you, I would like to put on record, peace building is key. And the academia is certainly the workshop. And the byproduct is peaceful coexistence. Since the ancient times, peace has remained a priceless social commodity. Though intrinsically, it exists side by side with conflicts. As a matter of fact, in human society, peace and conflict are bedfellows without affection. Peace is multifaceted and complex in nature. However complex, all men desire it at all times. Surprisingly, only a few are willing to give peace at all times. Peace is the bedrock of social development in both micro and macro societies. Nations, of course, spare no resources in providing necessary mechanisms for peaceful coexistence and its sustenance. But the other side of conflict is strongly integral and correlated with growth and development, such that the latter basically depends on the effective management of the former. Even in the scriptures, we are told that development and spiritual growth cannot take place in the home of Franco. And in our societal parlance, we also say that without peace, there cannot be development. So you see, peace is fundamental in resolving extremism. It must be clearly stated at this point that there is no situation of absolute peace or absolute conflict anywhere except in heaven or in hell. Be that as it may, societies both ancient and modern consciously desire mechanisms for peace building and conflict resolutions. This is irrespective of the huge human and natural resources involved in sustaining the peace mechanisms and processes. At the end of the day, where peaceful resolution, the nation or the people enjoy development and growth. With education and academia, co-piloting the affairs of peaceful coexistence. It is not surprising that the webinar today captions the need for the academia to come to the forefront and to play a role in the fight against extremism and in the process of conflict management. In all ages, society's intellectuals to fashion relevant tools for curbing extremism, achieving peace through peace-building processes, and even knowledge which the academia is known for. Philosophers like Plato, Aristotle, Russell have remained relevant reference points till date. Today, the Nobel Prize Award, out of the 135 that has been given, 101 is on peace. And that shows the importance of peace. Of this number, 101, of this number, about 7 of them have been won by individuals, and about 20 of them, thereabout, by industries. And one peace awardee that comes to mind at this moment is, of course, the young Nobel Peace Award awardee of 2014, Malala, who fought for the right of the education of the child. That again brings to the importance of peace in conflict resolution. Look at the irony of fate. Alfred Nobel, this inventor and also a weapon manufacturer, an industrialist, initiated the Nobel Peace Award of his vocational calling, inspired his economic interest as an industrialist manufacturer of weapons, who knows the consequence of weapons. It is not surprising, too, that he initiated the Nobel Prize. I just wanted to cite this to tell you that the academia, the intellectuals, are fully aware of their role, but they must come out of their wardrobes to play the fundamental of conflict resolution with a view of demystifying the import and importance of extremism. The onus remained more on the academia and intellectuals of our society to lead the way in fashioning relevant social tools for curbing extremism and building peace for the societies. The evolution of most modern social institutions and principles like democracy, parliamentary methods, the judiciary system, and even modern governments, all in general are springboards of great philosophers of old to take advantage of this institutional structure to provide peace in our nation and the globe at large. The academia of this age cannot afford to fail the society in generating the required value systems and institutions that can curb the pervading extremisms and bring back society to social order and peace. The role of peace building is that of the academia. We should not shy away from it. One who has the tool to exchange knowledge, to profile solutions, to use its intellectual wealth to demystify extremism is the one that is called to play at this time. Society are doomed if academia failed in this responsibility, and we must not fail. This webinar is a wake-up call to the academia to engage in finding solutions to the problem of our social conflicts and extremism that is ravaging modern society globally. The Igbinedion University is determined to be part of global efforts of making modern academia to live up to their identified social responsibility, building and also curbing the activities of extremism. We hope that at the end of this webinar, appropriate peace mechanisms for curbing conflicts and extremisms will be identified and recommended for use. Efforts directed at ridding the society of conflicts by other means have failed to yield maximum expected results. The result of theorists and experts in conflict resolution focus more on peace building And this mechanism and related institutions are required for achieving a successful society. The academia is well endowed to meet this responsibility, and we must live up to our expectation. I call on all the participants that are viewing through our webinar to actively engage in finding solutions to the numerous security challenges that is facing not just our country, the African continent, and the whole world at large. In all, I urge participants to also diagnose the following peaceful mechanisms and see how we can use them to achieve our desired goal. Peace education is fundamental. Peace advocacy is important, and peace journalism is also a fundamental role. Academics, the academia, the institution, intellectuals, you are invited to this webinar to please contribute to a peaceful world that we live in. Thank you very much.
Thank you, our Vice Chancellor. Next will be the Nobel laureate, who is giving us what I call a goodwill address, cum, some intellectual exertions. It's more than a goodwill address. Wole Soyinka.
This conference, and I'll send a full text to the organizers in case other parts are useful. I will title this my contribution, Violence, Ethics, and the Policing Imperative. What academia is singularly equipped to contribute to a people's security is, I would suggest, the inculcation of a holistic awareness in others. By others, I refer to government and other policymakers and influencers of society, as well as the generality of the government, that is, you and me. An understanding, in other words, that a people's security depends absolutely on recognition accompanied by practice and conduct. That security is not a single-track affair. Of course, it is primarily a formal responsibility of the state. It is, however, just as crucially a participatory undertaking that involves the citizenry. Indeed, even at the risk of seeming to attempt to let the state off the hook, I believe that the people should assign about 60% of security responsibility to themselves, leaving just 40% to the state. These are, of course, rough divisions, but the implication is clear enough. In their own interest, citizens should assume the major proportion of the task of securing their own existence through structures that are community-based. The state is unlikely to accede readily to this because most states do not trust the polity, being illegitimate or having forfeited their legitimacy through misgovernance, self-alienation, and or outright criminalities. The state becomes so preoccupied with its survival that it sees even engagements of mutual benefit to both sides as enemy tactics, an attempted erosion of its authority. Today, however, within the nation, few will deny that Nigerian humanity is rapidly joining the ranks of the endangered species. Only a minority is spared the routine of waking up in the morning and sinking almost immediately into the gloom of fear, an oppressive inability to reassure oneself and one's household that at the end of that working day, one would regain home intact in one whole piece. Within the home, the commonest expression is sleeping with one eye open. As for a road trip virtually anywhere within national borders, the question is, are you fated to be ambushed, kidnapped, and marched into the deep forest, blindfolded, brutalized, starved, while negotiations commence over ransom for your liberty and even life? The consequence is that the productive energies and resources are squandered, diverted to that elementary aspect of security, survival, plain, simple, and foremost. This nation has cause to worry about more than physical survival. We find ourselves within a vortex that sucks the people under, spews us into an ethical void, where future generations are programmed to accept as normal, even laudable, what our collective inner being once considered unthinkable. State neglect and indifference promotes the language and posture of civic surrender as we careen heedlessly through blood-greased chutes towards extinction. We do where the primary responsibility lies. Unfortunately, however, the first-line victims are the least equipped in the strategies for their own survival. Very few at this conference are equipped to deal, for instance, with Boko Haram, with marauding cattle herdsmen armed with AK-47s, or with ISWAP and allies constantly expanding their domain across the West African landscape. However, grassroots police, under whatever name, can reduce the current epidemic of kidnapping, child rape, and ritual killings. That, I hope, is so obvious that it needs no reiteration. That grassroots policing is a tested measure against the dehumanizing of the weak, the exposed, and other vulnerable of society. This has been proved again and again. The average citizen is not equipped to face the armed robber. We know to whose security portfolio that belongs. But civic participation is also critical, since the citizen can be enrolled in the basic exercise, for instance, of noting where there's a sudden, unexplained rush of affluence, where it inundates the community. Members of that community can be schooled into understanding that they have a responsibility to themselves to ask questions, cultivate alertness, probe, monitor, and share the unusual, refusal to be seduced by the trickle-down largesse that occasionally moistens their parched throats and renders them accessories to crimes against their own being and even survival. The synergy is thus what security deeply requires. The hurt shared when one's child is kidnapped and run through inhuman stress, often traumatized for life. Security battles with one arm tied to its side through an unyielding sense of lines of separation. By contrast, an architecture of security gradation, I beg your pardon, reduces the sense of estrangement. The bastardized slogan, the policeman is your friend, draws a bitter guffaw from citizens, but does not cease to be a legitimate ambition of society. I have a special request on this occasion. It is one that we do not often, and for reasons that are easily identified, we do not often hear. However, if only once in a while, social conscience, complete holistic social consent, demands that it be voiced. And so, let the cloak of humaneness be extended in all its effects to those who place their lives at risk to ensure that society survives and that its members, that is, you and I, enjoy even a modicum of existence in safety and dignity. The excesses and abuse of power, wherever detected, must of course be resisted and countermanded only will and its part of the eternal credit of the movement, now etched as a milestone on Nigerian history. What society also owes itself, however, is a rigorous guidance of turning into the very monstrosities that it arouses and mobilizes itself to expunge. When acts of sheer sadism are tolerated as the norm, we coarsen our own human sensibilities and teach youths that all ethical barriers are banished and that all that is left is a recourse to barbarism at its rawest and crudest. I'm open to challenge from anyone on the justice, for instance, of beating a policeman to death, setting him on fire, then sharing his flesh. All this in full public glare, not attributable to state propaganda. Listen to the following open admission by two quote-unquote activists to a group of journalists in Ibadan. Ibadan, one of the most history-suffused, economically vibrant cities on the African continent, certainly among the most densely populated. Join young Abiodun, 70 years of age, and Mubarak, 24, during an interview with journalists at the police headquarters in LA in Ibadan. First, Abiodun, I quote, on Sunday, October 22, he says, Mubarak asked me to follow him to Alabata area in Ibadan, where his wife was staying. We got to Iwo Road and saw that the road had been blocked. Smoke was billowing. When we moved closer to see what was happening, we saw human beings being burnt. The mob was hitting the burnt bodies with sticks and taking the body parts. Mubarak came to me and said he wanted to take some of the body parts. He said he had someone he would sell them to. Mubarak went to take the two skulls. Now, Mr. Young Mubarak corroborated Abiodun's confession. In his words, I quote, some people in the crowd removed hands, legs, fingers, and feet, while others gathered the ashes from the burned bodies and took them away. I told Abiodun I would take. My dear colleagues, in whose cause, in whose just cause, I quote, was this abhorrence perpetrated? I personally repudiate whatever share of such a barbaric fiesta of decadence vicariously attaches to me. And I deplore all glib notions of vicarious guilt, justice, and collective settlement that go to mute voices of revolt, the dismissive waves of unconcern, the lack of response, of proportionate public horror, all of which collaborate as the end of a new, and this mentoring a new generation.
Money for your hand. Card. The price card. You know like that. You may come out soon. You will go us.
Alienation.
A long time.
Through the newspapers. And here I quote, "We need a radical restructuring of the security agencies, especially the police, not the sort of restructuring that focuses on building new barracks and purchasing new uniforms. No, we need reforms that police a civilian service, not a force. We need a police that refocuses on protecting citizens, their properties and liberties, not regime protection." Those are the words of Dr. Sam Amadi, chairman of NERC, in the Sunday Punch, November 20. And of course, there are various ways of muting that mentality of force and bringing it closer to civil society. The creation of second, third, or fourth spheres of security as understood by governance tiers and community policing, by student, cadet units, and civilian reserves, both military and police, serve to blunt the sharp edges of professionalized division in social constructs. Such an approach demystifies the uniform, that symbol of alienated authority that has become, one does acknowledge, mind you, unavoidable struts and braces in the scaffolding of modern society. There do exist accessible models. All the foregoing I readily concede, which is towards idealized options. But there's nothing wrong with holding them up as desirable and as ultimate social targets. Such models were operational in one or two Scandinavian countries during World War II, and states such as Israel operate their own versions of such formulation till today. Again, I remain aware that the Nigerian social actualities make such thinking seem utopian. But then, that very in extremis of a dire societal abandonment, one that approaches a state of total enemy, calls for drastic solutions. The recent anguished cry of the Sultan of Sokoto was not wrung from the alarmist throat of idle royalty. No, it should shatter all hermetic thinking that continues to pander to a nation's systemic collapse. A step-by-step proceeding cannot be faulted. At least everyone knows what has been openly bruited as state police. That paving stone is as solid as any on which to step as we attempt to scale the security boat. The arguments have been objectively exhausted. Only the will to implementation remains stubbornly elusive. Perhaps this gathering will enable us to understand why. I wish you all a productive exchange. Thank you.
That was vintage Professor Shoyinka. If I say a word on what he has just shared with us, I will just simply say he tried to do an overview of security challenges nationally and globally, and the barbaric levels extremism can get to, a situation where in the course of a crisis, some people were burned, and then some people went there to negotiate for body parts. And at the end of the day, and he was asking, in whose interest would this be? No matter what prompted your protest, is a good thing to add to the episode? Obviously, it's not good. And he did a capital by suggesting the need to focus policing more at the community level, at the state level. I recall that our next speaker, General Dambazo, in one of his scintillating lectures here, equally advocated the imperative of community policing. He even illustrated with the United States, where he was an Harvard fellow, that some universities even have university police. I hope I am doing a correct recollection, General. So now we move to the next speaker in the person of General Abdurrahman Dambazo. Like I said, he will be looking at this team from the perspective of military training and doctrine. General, sir, over to you.
Thank you very much, the Vice Chancellor, Professor Ezimoye, the Deputy Vice Chancellor, the Dean, Arts and Social Sciences, the Director of Broadcasting Center, the representative of the Brigade Commander, the registrar, and all other staff of the university, and of course, my fellow speakers, important webinar with the theme, the role of the academia encountering extremism. And of course, my topic has to do with rejigging the armed forces, training and doctrine in countering extremism. But before I go on this, I first want to once more thank the university for giving me this opportunity to speak. To begin with, I must appreciate our soldiers, especially the fallen heroes who sacrificed their lives fighting insurgency, terrorism, violent extremism, and other violent crimes, particularly the banditry, cattle rustling, and kidnapping. No doubt also that the Boko Haram issue is no longer holding physical ground as much with hosting their flags as they did prior to 2015. So those soldiers, to me, have made a lot of sacrifice. Just yesterday, the Chief of Army Staff commissioned a project, housing project dedicated to the families of officers and soldiers who lost their loved ones while on active service. But even with the fact that the Boko Haram insurgency, rather insurgents, do not hold ground the way they did prior to 2015, it is still a fact that their presence is still felt on the fringes of Lake Chad Basin, which means the region is still under its threat. And in addition to that, unlike prior 2015, today we have about 3 groups or functions of Boko Haram. The main Shekau function, the function led earlier by the son of Mohammed Yusuf, who was the original leader of Boko Haram that split from Shekau and end up forming the Islamic State of West African province. Then the third function is the Bakura function. So which means that there's a lot of more task in fighting this issue. Not only that they split, they've also extended or have affiliations with other groups within the Sahel, particularly in Mali. We have Akim and the Islamic State of Greater Sahel. And of course, to the east, the Al-Shabaab in Somalia. We tend to conflate these issues as if they are one and the same. That is insurgency, terrorism, and violent extremism. And of course, they can appear to be in one place, but each of these has its own counter principles, tactics, techniques, and procedures. Countering violent extremism is a complex affair that requires more than military force. However, employing such force as part of the overall efforts requires a different approach from what obtains in conventional warfare. But since countering violent extremism is not the business of the armed forces alone, it therefore requires the combined efforts of all stakeholders that include the police, civil defense, civilian communities, civil society organizations, humanitarian organizations, professional bodies, religious clerics and institutions, etc. Which means that to do this, we must combine the military and civilian components. We should not forget the fact that the Northeast is one of the lowest in development indices in Nigeria. So in terms of poverty, unemployment, healthcare services, education, of course, less Islamic education because that region has been foremost in terms of Islamic education for over 700 years. Economic deprivation and inequalities, the region's scores are far below the universal standards, making it a convenient terrorist breeding ground. Furthermore, part of the region lies within the Sahel, which experiences most devastating impact of climate change, resulting in the desertification and drought, leading to forced migration of both farmers and herders. We must not forget the fact that the devastating effects of climate change have denied over 40 million people their livelihood in that region. So these are issues beyond military doctrine alone. They are issues to be tackled by good governance. In terms of percentage, therefore, I will say that civilian components of countering violent extremism will take about 80%, while that of the military, 20%. Also, the challenge of violent extremism is not limited to Nigeria, as it is now, and I've mentioned that earlier. It is a regional issue, and indeed a global one for that matter, which requires both regional and global response. So what about doctrine, rejigging doctrine? Doctrine is just a guide that has been described as a force multiplier, the soul of warfare, or the pivotal to success of war. It not only provides the fundamental principles by which it guides the actions of the armed forces in support of national objectives. It consists of tactics, techniques, and procedures required in battle. Doctrine is not fixed or permanent. It is a result of experience and lessons learned. Therefore, the need to periodically rejig it. And this is why I think this topic was included in this webinar. The conversation of rejigging training and doctrine of the military to counter extremism is apt. And the military has been looking at its doctrine from time to time, bearing in mind contemporary threats to national security, indeed as it affects the military itself. As a general countermeasure, therefore, the Nigerian military has in recent past reviewed its doctrine from fighting war of attrition, which requires total destruction. Warfare by attrition seeks victory through the cumulative destruction of enemies and material assets by superior firepower and technology. The long engagement in attrition warfare is meant to wear down the enemy. We have example of the Egypt-Israeli war, but these are conventional wars. From the attrition warfare now we moved to maneuvers approach to warfare. This happened some 10 years ago, of course, after I left the service myself. Maneuvers warfare is war fighting philosophy that seeks to shatter the enemy's cohesion through a series of rapid, violent, and unexpected actions which create turbulent and rapidly deteriorating situation with which he cannot cope. And I believe this, anybody, particularly the director of Buratai Center, must have studied Sun Tzu. And that is along that concept. You can win a war without actually fighting. It is directed at the enemy's center of gravity. His leadership, for instance, his weapon, and so on and so forth. Second, all the three services have at different times reviewed their order of battle, or what is popularly known as force structure. I started one reviewing for that of Nigerian Army when I was Chief of Army Staff in 2009. And subsequently, others came and continued. Today, we have, before then, when I was Chief of Army Staff, we had 5 divisions. The first division in Kaduna, second division where I had the privilege of commanding in Ibadan, which included the state. And we had third division, the armored division in Jos. We had 81 division in Lagos and 82nd division in Enugu. Those were our 5 divisions. But today the Army has 8 divisions, additional 3 divisions, looking at the nature of threats, not only in the Northeast, but also in Niger Delta, and today in the Northwest and North Central. Also, there have been more training platforms created at the tactical, operational, strategic levels. The NDC, which I had the privilege of being a director staff and director higher military organization. By the way, director staff is a lecturer. So I was there for 2.5 years to teach. Today has been elevated to National Defense College. A separate Army War College, Nigeria, has been created to fill the gap between those who attended Staff College and those who are attending the NDC. There are also the Nigerian Army Resource Centers. These are examples from the Army. You can understand my bias. I'm not giving an example from the Air Force and Navy, but they also have that. There is also expansion of peacekeeping training. When we were very active in peacekeeping while I was Chief of Army Staff, we expanded the capacity of the training to be able to train 2 battalions simultaneously. Then, just yesterday, there was commissioning of the Nigerian Army Cyber Warfare Command. So these are issues that have to do with doctrine.
Now my is if Chelsea lose, Chelsea don't qualify. No, this one am
Specific.
Yeah. But those people don't go 200. 200 level. No, really. And I know the now just
Specific to Boko Haram insurgency, we have seen the establishment of multinational joint task force with its own concept of operations. And of course, it has its key aim and its goals. And also, we've seen the establishment of a theater command structure, which includes Special Forces Command. But most importantly, we've seen of recent a change from the concept of forward operation bases to the super camps strategy. The FOBs have been dismantled in favor of the super camps because the realization that with the FOBs, the military forces were exposed to raids and ambushes and also theft of weapons and equipment. But then what the challenge has been between the super camps are focused mainly on force protection. But there is other protection that is also very important. That is civilian protection. Now, the American system, they focus on force protection because Americans do not fight on their territory. So wherever they send their forces, the most important priority is to ensure that their forces are protected. For us here, we need to be able to balance these two in whatever doctrine we adopt. And we should be able to have the response capability to quickly respond surgically in a way that is devastating to the enemy. So what kind of doctrine do we really require to counter extremism in Nigeria? It should be doctrine in line with the Manoeuvres approach to warfare, which we are having, but which must be intelligence-driven. We need a lot of intelligence to do this job. A doctrine that will protect both the force and civilians, to be able to create a balance. You remember the attack that happened recently of Zabarmani community, in which a number of civilians were killed. So that is the kind of thing the enemy wants to focus attention on. Because each time the civilians are killed, there will be uproar. And there will be bad blood against the military. They are not doing well, they are this. Everyone will forget what they have done in the past. So we must be able to protect the civilians as well as the force. In order to confuse enemy's mind, destabilize his decision cycle, loosen his cohesion, and destroy his center of gravity, our doctrine should focus on efforts to identify and eliminate the leadership deny them acquisition of weapons, make recruitment for them difficult, if not impossible, block their sources of funding, identify and prosecute their sponsors. Most important, win hearts and minds. And to do so, we must protect human rights, rule of law. We must be able to support them with medical outreach, construction efforts like bridges or reconstructing their houses, their markets, and so on and so forth. And guarantee them protection against enemy reprisals, because we need the communities to win this war, regardless of the doctrine. So to successfully achieve all this, we need actionable intelligence, appropriate equipment and manpower, and effective command and control. We have quite a lot of challenges, but I want to stop here because I'm also need time to go back to catch my flight. So probably during interaction, I'll be able to respond accordingly. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, General Dambazo. We have given him that latitude to exceed the 10 minutes for each speaker because he's the lead speaker. And that's why he has to be on the ground here with us. So subsequent speakers, please, let's try to keep to the 10-minute limit. And I would like to invite Nancy Yamut, the only lady in the midst. Nancy, I hope you are set. It's your turn to tell us about your partnership with the United States Agency for International Development in countering extremism, particularly in Lebanon. Thank you. Nancy is on. I hope you are able to locate her on the links.
Sorry, because you were saying my my speaker. Sorry. Okay. Thank you very much for this invitation. By the way, it's my first with this continent. I'm happy that I'm gonna be among you and tell you and share about my experience with USAID. So it all started with my sister and I conducting a research, an academic research, asking what friends are joining extremist groups, starting from Al-Qaeda to other types of groups like Fatah al-Islam. So we're asking why. And when we went to prison, which I'm gonna talk later on, it's interesting that we're talking about, they think that they are freedom fighters, while the Lebanese constitution considered them as extremists. So there was a lot of debate. We wanted to figure things out. We wanted to know more about, especially in Lebanon, which the extremism started in 2000. And not a lot of researchers conducted in-depth research concerning extremism. So in 2010, we have started the research. We went to prison. It's a prison which is a building contains around 860 extremists. It took us 2 years to build a trust. It took us a time to conduct this research and came up with a result. So this result was published as an article with Al Monitor. And this is where all started, where we changed our research the academia to a project that is really functional on the ground with the support of USAID. So we started first to conduct a research which is expressive therapy with the extremist. It wasn't easy. So imagine we started at 2010. In 2013, we got our first fund from USAID where we did the expressive therapy with the extremist. It wasn't easy. During the first 2 years, we only interviewed 20 extremists. Then when we did our first project, we had 60 prisoners who are convicted in extremism and condemned in extremism. Things weren't easy because we were women and we were 2 women going inside prison. It took us a lot of time to build the trust and the bond with the extremists. USAID was really fascinated by just 2 women doing things. So we needed to grow up. So we created a team of, actually we started as the team of women. So I'm not going to talk about gender equality and gender movement here. But the thing is, talking to women, we were veiled, by the way. I didn't appear in this way. It was quite simple. We were veiled. We didn't wear something provocative. We didn't talk about religion at all at that period of time. Women with us were like approaching like a mother or a sister to the extremist. And this is how we build a relationship. So the relationship, after doing the expressive therapy, some of the 60 extremists told us about where they are being recruited. So we went to the area where the recruitment aid was really interested to counter violence extremism for youth who are being recruited. Remember, Lebanon is with the borders of Syria, and our border is loose. So you need from Beirut to the borders around 2.5 hours to reach where Nusra is, or where ISIS is, or even if you want to continue further to Iraq. It's easy, the borders is easy for you to breach and go to your destination to extremists. So what happened is that we did a multidisciplinary program which addressed to youth. We picked up the area where the recruitment is happening. So there was a lot of youth who were stateless. So at that time, ISIS were giving passports. So they were giving the youth leadership position, ID position, and money.
As a basic scientist, before you can go and do your medicine. So I don't know what the craze is about here. Once they say don't do medicine, you see them running to chemical engineering. Because your first love, you stay put. In fact, people we trained to be either biochemist or anatomy.
Okay, sorry, I think there's just some disturbance. So to continue further, we did a multidisciplinary program for the stateless, where we worked more on their aggression, work on online safety. We worked more on giving them sense of belonging. And we wanted to continue further. So USAID, so I spoke to USAID. I cannot tell a stateless person who has no job and he's in the youth, which is 18 to 25, that will finish the training and you can go home. So we extended the program where we engaged the youth to do vocational training, where they were able to work in buildings or doing artwork that can be sold, which this is what happened exactly. So they gathered themselves into groups and they started like small businesses, and they started selling their product or giving their services through Facebook. So USAID was pushing too much for those youth to change, and this program went for 3 years to change the interest of this area in specific for recruitment for ISIS groups to become more engaging, to give more services, vocational services. So this is how we managed. So and this is went further. USAID even pushed our work to the Near East affairs, but at the moment it's a bit pending because due to COVID-19. So hopefully when things get more stable, we can go further with our counter-violence, extremism with USAID and Near East affairs. Thank you.
Thank you, Nancy, for sticking to time. I don't want to take questions at the moment. When everyone has had the opportunity to make his or her presentation, then if there are questions, we will take them. So I want to thank you very much. Next, we're going to take the professor from India, Professor Pariksha. Because of the time difference, you know, I think he has really sacrificed a lot of sleep. So, Professor Pariksha, it's your turn.
Thank you. Thanks a lot. Thank you. Thanks a lot. Namaskar. I would like to share my screen. So just show my presentation also. I hope it's visible to everyone. And very, very warm greetings from this part of the world, from India. It's not that late at this moment. It's just 3 in the afternoon, 4 in the afternoon. So I'm not sacrificing my sleep. Thank you. A very warm thank you to the Honorable Vice Chancellor for giving this opportunity to me, and to all the university and my friend Femi for inviting me to be lecture over here. Greetings to the Deputy Vice Chancellor, the deans, the distinguished staff, my fellow speakers, Nancy, our Nobel laureate, Professor Wole, and the general professor, a general who is a professor also, Abdul Rahman. Very, very warm greetings to all of you. And I come from Jammu and Kashmir, and from here I'll be talking about something regarding tourism and peace. So I would be talking about how we can counter violent extremism through tourism and co-create a peace initiative over here. So that's what my discussion is going to be. Well, what we have seen, obviously, during the pandemic, there have been times that tourism has been blocked completely. But if we take pre-pandemic times, tourism is one which goes through different boundaries, and where we have all these things happening, and where people interact with each other, they talk to each other, and they discuss a lot of things, and they travel. It is one of the most important and potent vehicles for promoting peace and peace throughout the people of the world. As our Honorable Speaker General was speaking about the fact that it's just not the army which has to counter extremism, it has to, the civil society also has to come forward, and we as academicians have to come forward. And we have to deliver some positive things to the society. So 3 very important things that I feel that peace building processes vis-a-vis extremism is concerned are required. One is your understanding the cultural opportunities. A lot of violence brings or builds on the cultural differences that the people will have and how things move up. A lot of host communities are not willing to share their views, not willing to talk about what is going on within their culture, trying to protect this extremism angle, which I feel is a very negative aspect, and which if we have people from different parts of the world, tourism traveling, they could be easily working on us. We are actually trying to get rid of, through tourism, we can get rid of the conditions that lead to conflict. Because if there is more interaction between people, and if people keep traveling, keep talking to each other, a lot of misunderstandings get removed. It establishes religious harmony by bringing people of different religions in close contact. So we should not be talking about that one sort of religion or one aspect of people or one state or one region. People are actually indulging in extremism. If they open out their borders, if people from other places go out and talk to them, meet them, what we see is that peace and tourism can build up and co-create and co-relate with each other. And they can actually help towards or speed up the peace building process. Security is one angle we always talking about, but security standalone can look at, or as army, the general was speaking about, can look at that particular thing. But local community participation and the international community participation can always help in bringing about the efforts and bring out these intense considerations which can actually work towards peace building. Coalition of international travelers, travel industry can promote tourism initiatives that can contribute to this international understanding, quality of environment, the preservation of heritage. We have seen over the years that one of the very important aspects which has suffered because of extremism is our culture and heritage. At a lot of places there has been degradation of our heritage. A lot of cultural degradation has happened. Culture at various places has been destroyed because of this. And through these initiatives, we can also always think of building up a sustainable world. When I make use of the word sustainable, sustainability is a very important aspect vis-a-vis tourism, extremism, peace is concerned. We always keep talking about the fact that sustainability leads to the fact that how do we take care of our resources, whatever resources that are available with us, that is men, money, machinery, materials, methods, how do we protect them? Sustainability primarily refers to the fact that leaving the things in a better manner, if not in the same manner as they were acquired. So that's a very important aspect. And once we don't leave the things in the same manner, we degrade them, there starts a fight erupts between people. And actually sustainability goes out for a toss and the extremism starts building it up. So that's what we keep talking about, that tourism could be one of those mediums which can actually provide information regarding sustainability. Our academicians could work out to building that particular things, and all the beliefs, the perspectives, the culture, the politics of one country to the citizens of another country. That could be one of the very important aspects. Transfer of this information through tourism could be a very, very important aspect. And what we feel and what our research has shown that in this Indian subcontinent, that it could be one of those mediators for peace. It could be one of those mediators which could help in peace building. So this is something where I talk about that tourism provides an effective tool for promoting peace, where there are which leads to a lot of cross-cultural interaction. And this is what I've been talking about: national integration, goodwill, educational standards, justice, mutual respect for other, tolerance. And if all these 6 pillars are there, and these 6 pillars actually lead towards peace building and lessening of the extremism aspect. So that's what we have been talking about, and that's what we have been advocating in this part of the world. A lot of my research has been concentrated on this particular aspect, and this is what we have found. As we raise the educational standards, as the educational standards are raised, the tolerance aspect also increases. Once the tolerance increases, the goodwill for other people increases. And once this goodwill increases, there's a mutual respect for everybody. And once this mutual respect is there, a lot of national integration happens, and a lot of resources because of which terrorism actually exists, extremism actually exists, that is also moving down. And this is a pyramid that we talk about. At the bottom, we have this transforming conflict or extremism and balancing the effects of tourism. But once we move up, we can start with the peace building or processes, eradication of extremism. That is, if we use those earlier 6 pillars where we have education, integration, and we have goodwill, started building it up, they all lead to this particular aspect, which is referred to as peace tourism. And that is what we look at. One very important aspect when we're trying to challenge extremism, when we are trying to challenge violence, is the community participation. Any government around the globe, as the general was also speaking, the civil society has to come forward, as Professor Nancy was also talking about the fact that they came up, they started working. So community participation is a very, very important aspect, which can actually motivate or demotivate the local community to, or local youth to not to participate in extremism, which can actually motivate them towards more positive steps, help them understand what is more what are the basic things required, and it can actually build in this socio-cultural empowerment. So these initiatives can actually build up this socio-cultural empowerment, the psychological empowerment, and the best aspect that I always keep referring towards is the economic empowerment. Because if you have these economic losses and economic leakages, because of that also a lot of discontent and disorientation creeps amongst the youth. And once anger somehow, and they start working towards extremism. They think of challenging it, and they think of working towards it. And this is the last thing that I want to talk about is the community participation. Obviously, this tourism and peace building process is a joint venture working. A lot of decision making is required. A lot of representation in community structures is actually required, which actually will help in eradication of extremism and helping us understand and see to it that the peace is restored in the trouble areas wherever it is going around. Thank you. Thanks a lot. I think I finished within my 10 minutes, and it's 9 minutes and 19 seconds, and that's what I was thinking.
Thank you, Professor Pariksha. Professor
Yeah.
Pariksha and myself, we are on the faculty of the Global Understanding Program of East Carolina University, USA together. And what he has said in a nutshell is that when people travel around the world, they travel to the next community, that is what tourism is all about. They tend to understand each other better. And then the tendency to want to go into extremism through misunderstanding of other people's beliefs and orientations would be drastically reduced. So thank you very much. Next is Professor Imafidon. Professor Imafidon is addressing the topic. Chris Imafidon is addressing the topic on the use of mass education to counter extremism. Prof, you are welcome on board. It's your turn. Professor Imafidon, you're on the spotlight already.
Okay, can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Okay, thank you very much for this great opportunity to share some of what we have been doing here in the UK, particularly looking at the core issue of education as a tool, an indispensable tool for not just reducing, but eliminating every form of extremism. I want to start off by thanking the Vice Chancellor for putting this together along with Dr. Femi. I want to share my appreciation for the Igbinedion University, really the premier university in terms of providing the alternative education to the state-controlled and state-owned educational system. Because this sector needs to be vibrant and need to be able to provide the needed competition in the sphere of educating, strengthening, and building the next generation. If you look at me here, I don't know whether you can see me, I'm proudly wearing a T-shirt that supports what the next generation is telling us. We are the failed generation. NSAS represents the new fresh voice that will reorientate the nation, because this nation is drifting towards an abyss. This is not the nation that I was born into. The Nigeria I was born into was a country where the neighbor looked after his neighbor. We were our brother's keepers. The nation I read of now and see on television is totally unrecognizable from the nation I once held proudly and shared my passion for. I'm very pleased that the former Defense Chief, Professor General Gwanzo, spoke earlier and expressed a figure that I think all leaders in the states and Abuja must hear. terrorism is 20% military and 80% others. I wish we can hold that statistic in mind. If we hold that statistic in mind, if we want to counter terrorism, and we are serious about it, and we deliberately want to eliminate it because it was born, it shall also die. If we work hard in this generation, it will die in our generation. If we don't, if we play politics with it, if we play tribalism with it, it will die in the next generation. And posterity and history will judge us very harshly, because it is severely idiotic for a nation that has its children given to them by God. Nobody buys a child. Nobody can buy another human being. So the children that we have, if we look at them as gifts from God, and we understand what President Nelson Mandela told us, that the most powerful weapon to change this world is education. We won't fool about with the budget we have allocated to education. We won't mess about with our teachers. We won't mess about with shutting university. What business has a government got in shutting down university, which is supposed to be the bastion of enlightenment? Your greatest wealth on earth, according to Robert Kiyosaki, the New York best-selling author, he said your greatest wealth on earth is not the oil in the ground, it's not the gold in the ground. Your greatest wealth on earth is education. An educated mind is a rich mind, is wealthy in material resources and wealthy in intellectual resources. So the main thing I want Igbinedion University to do is commission, let charity begin at home, commission that the Department for Education in the university comes out with their graduates. I can work with you to educate every single Nigerian child. It is a birthright. It doesn't matter whether you are born in Sokoto or you are born in Southampton. It doesn't matter if you are born in Boronu. Education, that means the identification, the development, and the deployment of your God-given talent. That's education. I'm not talking about certification. Certification is when you go into a classroom, listen to a body of knowledge, regurgitate it at the end of the term, and you are given a piece of paper. That serves no country no good. What is education? And truly, an educated mind is a mind that is developed for community building, a mind that is developed understanding that the genius in them has to be expressed in their generation. So what I will really, really cry for and yearn for is for every single hearer to me today, the voice, sound of my voice. You are a quasi-educator. What you know, you share with others. I still believe that the entire Boko Haram problem can be solved in 6 months. I know it can be solved in 6 months because the people that are in the forefront of it have minds that have been undeveloped, warped, or underdeveloped. If those soldiers, if those so-called terrorists who, by the way, from the last I heard, were members of the human race. By the way, from the last I heard, they eat food when they're hungry. By the way, from the last I heard, they drink water when they are thirsty. So the commonalities between the victim and the perpetrator can be hybrid using the most powerful tool on the planet Earth, education, by identifying what they love. There is nothing called Islamic education. There is nothing called Christian education. Education is neutral. It is the development of the hidden talent in that child that you gave a name to when he was 7 days old. That young girl that you danced around because the child was born. That boy that you knew your auntie gave birth to. If we treat every child, underline this, every child every youth, every adult as your biological relative has been linked to you, the issue of extremism becomes history. So the federal government must wake up and smell the coffee. There is no one that cannot be educated. There is no age barrier to acquiring knowledge and applying that knowledge to solve a problem. There isn't. You can't say that 15 million children that are supposed to be in school today, they are out of school. You expect them to come out and be responsible members of the society? That is the fighter ground for terrorism. Every single child, every single youth, no matter the tribe, no matter the area, no matter the religion, must, repeat, must be educated. If not, the military that you have is incapable of defeating them in any war. The worst person you want to wage war against is a miseducated mind or a warped mind. So if we want to fund terrorism, we should allow education to drift and not become a national priority. If we want to bring prosperity and peace, then we must realize that our neighbor's son, when he trains and becomes a doctor, he's not just going to treat his father or treat his mother. When your neighbor's daughter trains and becomes a nurse, he's not just going to treat the parents, he will also treat you. He will treat members of the community. Therefore, because of this untold benefit, not just the so-called war against extremism, but because of the sure requirement for us to be a father to the nations, to be a brother to your neighbor, to walk in that knowledge that if you know of someone right now that is not getting the education you want for your son, I'm not saying education that you have in school. If the federal government officials, those in the executive, those in the legislature, those in the judiciary, treat every child as their own child, this discussion will not take place. We'll have a celebration of their talent. We have a celebration of their accomplishment. We have a celebration of their attainment. Because when the Nigerian youth under 17 played in the World Cup and won the World Cup against English prediction, against Brazil, against Argentina, those youths could have been terrorists, but their talent was harnessed in football and deployed in football, and the nation rejoiced because their sporting talent was acknowledged and developed. When a Nigerian girl was invited by NATO to advise them on military installation, every single WhatsApp group shared it in joy and rejoiced. When, listen to this, a Nigerian was able to find out the cure and the vaccine for COVID-19, every Nigerian rejoiced because they knew their son found the cure and the vaccine for COVID-19. The role, therefore, I'm calling on you, the Vice Chancellor. The role I'm calling on you, the NUC. The role I'm calling on you, the Minister of Education and Minister for Education. The role I'm calling on you, the President, the Commander-in-Chief, and the Father-in-Chief, is that let's take these children, let's snatch them, and be able to produce another child of us that will discover the next solution to a global problem. Because in every Nigerian child, in every Nigerian youth, in every Nigerian adult resides a deposit of talent and genius that is more precious than the oil on the ground, that is more precious than the short-term economic money that you want to get. Money counts for nothing when talent is exploited, when talent is exploited, and when talent is deployed. I wish I had more time, because I'm rushing for another meeting, to bring down to you a schematic that happened in Northern Ireland when the South and the North were involved in the biggest and the toughest war ever, when there was religious extremism, and how peace returned to Ireland. And we now call it the Good Friday Agreement between the British forces and the Irish forces. We don't even have an external aggressor. We therefore have no excuse whatsoever not to neutralize Boko Haram in 6 calendar months. No excuse. I thank you for the opportunity. I hope we are able to implement rather than just discuss, debate, and disseminate information. I'm grateful to you, and long live my fatherland, and long live the Federal Republic of Nigeria. I thank you.
Thank you, Professor Imafidon. You are as passionate as when I met you in 2015 when you came for the transition to handing over power to President Muhammadu Buhari. You remain a patriot. We appreciate you. The next speaker is Captain Xi Di Ueno. I said earlier that he's a British Army officer. He's a reserve officer now, but he's still very vibrant as he still consults here and there. I hope Xi Di is on. It's your turn.
Good morning. I hope you can hear me.
Yeah, good morning.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you very much for the invitation and for the introduction. As the professor said, my name is Xi Di Ueno, and as my name would indicate, I'm a Nigerian, and I serve in the British Army Reserve. So I'm going to give a very brief presentation. If you, sorry, just to backtrack, I'd like to obviously extend my greetings to everybody in the hall and stand on all previous protocol. I'm going to try and share my screen. This hopefully will be successful. So I'm not necessarily the best with these things. Okay, can everybody see that? Oh, you still see me? Yeah, we can now. Okay, can you see my presentation, or are you seeing me? Let me see. I'm going to try that again. Sorry, I wasn't sure if you could see my screen. So, Prof, could you tell me if you can see my presentation?
Yeah, we can.
You can? Okay, that's great. Okay, so let me just quickly roll in through this. So I'm just going to give you a brief background about myself. Obviously, as I said, I grew up in Nigeria and I joined the British Army Reserve when I came here for university. And as a result, I deployed twice to Iraq and Afghanistan. And I'm going to try and contrast some of my experiences there and just 5 very quick lessons that maybe we can use to understand how Nigeria can look at its own situation. So the first thing is to understand the terrain. So I'm going to say when I deployed to Iraq, it was in 2004. This was at the beginning of just after the invasion and just before the insurgency started in the main. Now, when we trained for it, we're training in December of, in the last 3 months of 2003, from October to December. So it was winter in the United Kingdom, it was very cold, and we're training, and it was a joke amongst ourselves that we're training to go to the desert and, it's so freezing cold. When we actually arrived in Iraq, it was freezing cold. It was raining, it was sleety, it was like 2 degrees. In the desert, it was snowing. We had no idea that, actually it snowed in the desert. That's just one thing about not understanding the terrain, the physical terrain. When we went to Afghanistan, so these pictures are all from Afghanistan. Again, we were expecting to go into a desert. So, if you can imagine, I expected it all to look more like this, with mountains. Sorry, let me go back. With mountains and deserts and all of this kind of stuff. But what we actually, when we went there, there's next to the Helmand River, there's a place called the Green Zone, which is irrigated. There was an American irrigation scheme in the 50s that created this huge irrigated place. So in essence, it's almost like a jungle. You can see how close the terrain is. We didn't understand the terrain. So, you could see this young fellow here going out in his t-shirts and, his desert camouflage, meaning that you stood out in the green environment. You would change from, and the transition was very sudden. You'd go from desert straight into the green zone. So it is key that we understand the terrain. And in Nigeria in itself, I speak as a Southern Nigerian. Before I ever went to the North for the first time, I thought that all of the North was just, a desert. There wasn't much there. And when I went there, I saw the huge diversity in terms of terrain, the hills, the mountains, the tree, the forests. Without understanding how terrain influences, conflict, you will not win that conflict. And we have the same thing here in Nigeria, where, people like myself will think that Borno State is, a desert, but in fact, you've got swamps, you've got rivers, you've got forests. You need to understand the physical terrain. The second point is to really, really understand the human terrain. So again, I will go back to the example of Iraq. What we knew about Iraq when we deployed was that, Iraq was an Islamic country. People there were Muslims. We knew they were Sunni, they were Shia. But when I went there, there was a huge diversity. There were Christians, there were Muslims, there were Sunni, Shia, Zoroastrians, Yazidis, people who, whose their religions dated back to before, the Bible or the Quran. A huge diversity of people. There were fair-haired people, blonde hair, blue eyes, red hair. You could see there were black people, black Africans. There was a huge diversity, and these are black Iraqis, not African immigrants. These are Iraqis. You can see there were the kids. There were different. There were Kurds, Arabs, Turkmen. Completely a huge diversity. Likewise, it wasn't just as I said before, a desert. You had like archaeological monuments going back. This is in Ur where Noah was. This is going back to old religions. You had slums, you had cities, completely different environment. So without understanding, an area, to understand that, people are not just a monolith, especially in terms of an insurgency encounter and violent extremism, it's going to be very, very difficult for somebody to be able to defeat or to counter that insurgency. So again, we're coming back to Nigeria, coming back to what we're looking at in terms of violence in Borno State or up in the north or the northwest. Borno State is more diverse than, I would say, the southeast or the eastern of Nigeria. You've got the Kanuri, you've got the Shua Arabs, you've got the Fulani, you've got the Margi, you've got a huge variety of people, all of whom come to this conflict with their own motivations, with their own questions. We need to ask ourselves, why are Bagumi fishermen part of Boko Haram? What's their motivation? Why is Boko Haram able to move so freely in the Goza Mountains when other people find it difficult? What's going on there? Without understanding human terrain, you will never be able to defeat an insurgency. The second point is logistics. So, if this building here over on the right is our compound. It was our compound where we stayed, and essentially in front of it was, again, woods, trees, and then the Taliban. It was so essentially for that little piece of Helmand province, that was like the furthest point that we'd got to. And behind us was a logistic chain going from that compound back to a fob, which was in another compound, going back to Camp Bastion, which was in the desert in Helmand, going back through Pakistan, all the way back to the United Kingdom, a huge logistic chain. Now, this compound, the only way you could get to it was either walking through the bush or going along a small dirt track. And then the Taliban put so many IEDs on that track that we couldn't get any vehicles down. So anytime we needed resupply, we had to walk back through the bush to our compounds, put everything in our backpacks, and then walk back. But in that little compound, we never ran out of ammunition, we never ran out of food, we never ran out of water. We always knew if we got injured, somebody was going to come and pick us up. We knew that if we were going to be overrun, somebody would come and fight to us, or they would bring in something that would rescue us. This is the importance of logistics. It's not just bombs, bullets, water. It is the confidence that it gives soldiers that whatever you do, whatever is going to happen, somebody is looking after you. And we cannot understate the importance of logistics. And I speak again as a soldier with all the arrogance of an infantryman. We look down on logisticians. We think, these guys are just sitting at the back counting blankets. But without logistics, you will never fight a war. Can we say now that Nigeria has good logistics in any of its conflicts? We have the same problems going back to the civil war of poor logistics, all the way through to Ekomog, and right now to what's going on in the north. I'll keep referring to Boko Haram because maybe that's the most obvious conflict. We keep hearing the allegations of soldiers running out of ammunition. Soldiers, we see videos of soldiers drinking dirty water. I myself have seen how soldiers are resupplied up north with, taking pure water sachets and all of this kind of stuff, driving up and down in trucks. The importance of logistics, again, I would say cannot be understated. And as I said, it's without that confidence that it gave us that it doesn't matter what happens, we're going to get, someone is going to come and get us, or somebody will get something to us, gives you that motivation to fight, and gives you that belief that, you're fighting, that even if whatever you think or you believe about what you're fighting for, that at least you're fighting as part of of something, as a unit. So the next point is terrain. Terrain dictates tactics. Now this, this is going to be important again in terms of, comparing it again to the conflict up north. So I've described how, Afghanistan, in Helmand province, you go from the deserts, like, around here, to the green zone, where it's waterways, channels, grass and corn and other things that is as tall as a human being. You'll go from deserts where it's open, you can move about, you can maneuver, you can see all around you, you've got good visibility, to almost jungle warfare, where you've got to keep, close, you've got to, you won't see the enemy until they're maybe 5 meters in front of you. So you can't fight the same way in two different environments. You can't take one set of rules and then apply it in the same situation over and over and over again. Now, after 2007, 2008, the Taliban learned that they were not going to win against us, in a straight fight. So they started using IEDs. So you can see now in this picture here, you can see the soldiers, even though this is open ground where you could actually spread out. Normally as an infantryman, you want to spread out because that limits the effect of machine guns, artillery, etc. But you can see them walking in a line. This is because of IEDs. They're staying in what's called the IED lane. So the guy in front will be checking for IEDs, will be using a detector to make sure there's no IEDs. The terrain, the physical terrain, and the human terrain, as in the human terrain that the enemy dictates, forces you to fight in a certain way. Now, when we bring this back to Nigeria, looking at how we fight, the Nigerian army is still structured the way it was when it was designed, as in 1950s kind of force with a divisions, that controls brigades, that controls battalions, that has a brigade and division organization that controls the logistics, has a different supply and transport. It is brutally, to be brutal, it's archaic. It's a system that is not functional for what we've got now. We're fighting light, highly mobile forces who are relatively well armed, but they're very mobile. And you're trying to use tanks, to fight against people on motorcycles. It's illogical. If I can hear a tank coming from miles away, I just jump on my motorcycle and disappear, or I lay an IED in the only place you can go because the terrain it doesn't favor tanks. So the lessons that we should learn from that are that we can't continue using the same thing or doing the same thing over and over again and expecting success. We can't take the same tactics that have been put aside, that when they were given to us. I mean, the people that gave them to us, the British in the 50s, no longer use the same kind of organizational structure that we use. We can't talk about attritional warfare, Manoeuvres warfare, when we don't empower captains or lieutenants to take decisions that, that will be best for their units. So the importance of understanding the terrain and the type of conflict, can't be overstated. And finally, there's never ever a military solution to any sort of an insurgency or conflict. every single conflict, ends in discussion, even those conflicts where there's a comprehensive military defeat. So Germany in 1945 was comprehensively defeated by the Soviet Union and by Britain, America, and France. They still sat down, wrote out a piece of paper to say, yes, we have surrendered, we agree, here you go. Nigerian Civil War, Biafra was comprehensively defeated by the Nigerian army or by the Federal Army. At the end of the day, they still sat down and wrote out an article of surrender. And even though there was no dispute that Biafra had been defeated, they still sat down to write out a piece of paper. The same thing applies to what's going on in the Northeast. The military can only create the conditions whereby a force will come to the negotiating table. But there will never be such a thing as a comprehensive defeat without that backup of governance and a civil military kind of cooperation to bring the conflict to a close. So just to round up, and in conclusion, it's very important to understand the physical terrain, and then to really understand the terrain. And when I say that, I mean the human terrain. The people are the key to every insurgency and to every kind of extremist situation. Without logistics, you're not going to function. You'll just stagnate. And terrain will always dictate how you fight. But most importantly, without there being a civilian solution, a political, cultural, social solution, all of these come into it. And I think previous speakers have spoken very eloquently on this. The military is only there to create the conditions where you can fulfill all of these. You can bring all of these to bear. So I apologize, I've gone slightly over time, but thank you. And if there's any questions, please put them in the chat.
Thank you very much. We are just going to take one quick question before the last speaker speaks, and that question is addressed to General Dambazao. The question is, someone is asking whether the counterinsurgency effort in Nigeria has not been so long drawn because there is so much sabotage, because it appears the military that we have, based on its track record, should have decisively put an end to the insurgency.
So I just want to connect with what the last speaker mentioned, that in this kind of situation, most war situations, the military isn't the final solution. So the question of sabotage or whatever, there are so many factors that make war situation, elongated. And he has mentioned a couple of them. For instance, if there are not adequate logistics or equipment, it's a factor. Of course, we're dealing with a situation whereby, depending on how you define sabotage, we're dealing with a situation whereby we're not fighting a conventional warfare. An insurgency that is combined with terrorism and violent extremism. And these insurgents rely so much on the local communities for whatever information they want. And they are in a position to deal with any community that does not cooperate with them. Because there are quite a number of them that will live within those communities, and you will not be able to identify them because they are not in uniform. There's nothing written on their foreheads that they are insurgents. They can lead normal life within the communities and also give out information to the terrorists. So there are so many factors that can make warfare to be elongated. And I think this is the purpose of why we're looking at this issue. The issue of doctrine, for instance, if you attempt one strategy and it doesn't work, then you change to another, then you change to another. But at the end of the day, as I mentioned, that you cannot say the military alone can deal with this situation, because most of it requires very strong civilian components, no doubt about that. And I think this should be the approach. And we expect to see, we have lots of humanitarian organizations, NGOs, civil society organizations, trying as much as possible. But I think there is need for us to, get this thing well coordinated, well collaborated, in a way that the impact will be felt. So insurgency is not an issue that can be, taken as a stroke and finished. Thank you very much.
Thank you, General Dambozo. Now we have the last speaker, Professor Tunde Agara, who will be discussing the deployment of social research to countering extremism. My dear sir, it's your turn to take the floor.
Okay, thank you very much. I need to start by saying thank you for this opportunity that has been given to me to talk about social research as a tool to countering extremism. The reality of our present time is frightening. That much must be said. And within the COVID-19 pandemic, the world, the way we know it now, is further witnessing the collapse of global systems, witnessing increased violence, witnessing manifestations of political and religious extremism, and more importantly is the deterioration of socioeconomic conditions. Hence, all hands must be on deck. Social science research is not only geared towards what engender or what brings about or what causes extremism, but also social science research also focuses on the circumstances that makes its existence possible, on the circumstances that sustain and how to solve the problem. So if we go by this, then we can then see that social science research focuses on security from certain perspectives. Number one, social science research looks at factors that lead to extremism. Number two, it also focuses on factors that nurture extremism, factors that make it possible for it to persist and perpetuate itself. And then number three, social science research focuses on strategies, particularly strategies to be put in place to combat it through, number one, peacemaking, number two, peace building, and then number three, peacekeeping. It is in this respect, basically in this respect, that social science research becomes important to countering extremism through the different, of course, paradigms that it propels when you are carrying out the research. And so when we look at social science research, we discover that we carry out research basically based on four major paradigms or four major areas, as we may want to say it. And these four major areas are research through the functionalist perspective, through the interpretive perspective, through the radical humanist perspective, and through the radical structuralism. And that is why in social science research, we say we know in part, we don't know in full, because the full actually has to do with the understanding of all the different perspectives that inform the situation. So what is research on one hand? Without necessarily being pedantic and being didactic, I just want to say this, that research basically is a combination of two words, read and search. And because in social science, our major focus is on the social world and mind, and because it changes, then it brings to knowledge that when you are searching, the subject matter you are searching can change even before you reach your conclusion. And so conclusions and searching in social science need to be repeated so that we can have a fuller picture. So research is simply saying search and keep searching, because the subject matter is not static. The subject matter is always in a continuous state of flux. So when we now look at social science from the four perspectives or paradigms that it has engendered in research, then we begin to see that there are different areas and there are different places where social science research can contribute to countering extremism. For example, when you belong to the perspective that I referred to earlier as functionalist perspective, then it means therefore that you approach phenomenon, you approach situations or circumstances or any social problem like extremism that we are looking at from the point of view of from the point of view of science, scientific rigor. Let me put it that way. From the point of view of a social world that is orderly and a social world that is objective. So your point, using that, extremism or political extremism means that as a functionalist in social science, then you employ instruments such as questionnaire, interview, observations, coupled with statistical data and analysis. In doing this as a functionalist, because we have different perspectives, and that is why in social science we tend to adopt the interdisciplinary approach, which combines all these four paradigms or all these four school of thought or all these four perspectives. So if you're operating from the functionalist perspective or you're operating from the functionalist paradigm, then it means that your research will contain such scientific principles and rigor, questionnaire, interview, and so on. But for the functionalist, his major preoccupation is to find out causes. What are the causes for this extremist organization? What are the causes and how can these causes be ameliorated? How can we solve these basic problems of extremism, but adopting the perspective of scientific research? The second paradigm, or the second school of thought, or the second approach or method that we can use that is applicable in social science is what I refer to as the interpretive paradigm. And this interpretive paradigm focuses on understanding social problem or social phenomenon by understanding how people perceive it. So its major focus, if you're operating within the interpretive paradigm, is that your major focus will be on the inner consciousness and the inner working of the people involved. And that is why people in that place, in that area, prefer to use more of observation, more of, let me put it this way, the way we put it, observer as participant and participant as observer, because you want to find out what makes people join such organization, what is the motivation behind it, what appeal do these extremist organizations have. And we see the situation. France is almost overrun by ISIS. A lot of young French people, British people are moving across to Syria, to Iran, to join ISIS. There is an appeal. And the interpretive paradigm is finding out what that appeal is and seeing how you can counter the appeal. The third one, because of my time, is the radical humanist perspective. Because in social science research, we operate through 4 perspectives. And all these perspectives are important because the combination gives us the picture in full. The radical humanist perspective is interested or is based on the simple fact that the problem of the society is located within the society itself. And so it tends to look at causes of extremism from the class perspective of the society, the way the society is structured, and the way society deny some elements in the society, some people in the society. In the case of Nigeria, perhaps we'll be talking about ethnic or tribe, from having access into the federal system, for instance. In other words, what are the structures within the society that deny people access into what they ought to have and thereby drive them into extremist organization? If I'm entitled to education and I cannot have access to education, I am bound to rebel. There is a very beautiful book by one political scientist, Ted Gore, and he titled the book, Why Men Rebel. Why Men Rebel. And it emphasizes all of these perspectives. Why do people rebel? People rebel because they are denied access to allocations that they think they ought to have. And the radical humanist, looking at it from the perspective of the human being, begins to look into it. The fourth perspective is the radical structuralist. This radical structuralist believes simply on the fact that society cannot remain static. Society cannot remain the same. And so because it cannot really remain the same, they have a worldview that the society, as we see it today, is in a constant state of flux. And therefore, the fluctuations within society is caused by the contradictions within the society. So the radical structuralists would want to look at the causes or the reasons for extremist organization or extremist social movement, as we say it, from the perspective of the structure in society. The radical structuralists believe that the society is structured into 2, broadly, the ruling class and those who are ruled. And that the ruling class has the power to appropriate every resources of the society to their own interest. And when this is done, then a large chunk of the society, larger than the ruling class, are denied. And this denial makes them to rebel. They are not only denied the resources of the society, the resources that they ought to have, they are also denied access for legal expression of their grievances. And when all these opportunities are blocked, then there is a reversion to illegality. And extreme movements are formed and extreme illegalities begin to be. And that is what we do. So when we look, when we undertake research in social science, your research will be informed by what, I mean, let me put it this way, your research will be informed by the paradigm or the class you belong to. Are you a functionalist? Then you'll be looking for causes to solutions because you believe that society is orderly. Are you an interpretive sociologist? Then you'll be looking to find out why extremist organizations, extremist actions appeal to people and why they join such organizations. Are you a radical humanist? Then you'll be looking at the fact that the society is not static. Human beings are in society and there are basic things that they should enjoy. The denial of these basic things will lead men to grievances, and because the road and the avenue of expressing your grievances are blocked, you then regress or digress to extremism. Now, when you look at this, in case of extremism, and all these factors are brought in, then it is important to note that we will then be looking at the instances of extremism from all of these different perspectives. And that is why I started by saying that social science research believe that we do not know in full, but we know in part. So that approaches are not limited. The research is not limited to just one of the paradigms, but rather interdisciplinary paradigms means you employ all the different avenues so that you can have a fuller picture of the reality. That is where social science research can actually contribute, because you are not looking at it from one perspective, you are looking at it from a multi-perspective, looking at the causes, at the same time looking at why it appeals, at the same time looking at all of these things, and so we have a full picture. But I want to say this, even now in ending, that the power of social science research lies in the ability to look at social phenomena from different perspectives, and lie in the power that it offers explanation. Explanation not in part, but explanation in totality. Nigeria is a unique country. We must recognize that. Not only because it has plethora of scholars whose works are more appreciated outside the shores of the country than within the country, but basically because it is a country that is besieged by all kinds of numerous problems. As of date, it is the only country that has more ethnic militias than any other country in the world. As of date, I can mention 30. And all of these ethnic militias are creation of circumstances because government, for one reason or the other, have not been able to address the grievances of all of this. And each one of them, I mean, these ethnic militias, which we call social movements, varies or ranges from mild to moderate and to extreme views. And all of these extremists come into play. I say this finally, that a lot of researches, social researches have been carried out by scholars, profiling solutions to social phenomena from different perspectives, thereby giving us a robust and informed opinions which need collations and application to solve our problems. But unfortunately, we have two problems, two major problems that are working against us in this respect. Number one is simply the lack of an intelligentsia input to policy. Successive governments have shown aversion to academia coming into policy making, or rather using inputs from researches and findings into making policy. And that has always been a major problem, okay? Without having to just mention names, it is only one government that have made use of intelligentsia robustly. So far, there is always one aversion to this. And that begins to make some of us to wonder the rationale for setting up centers such as NIPS, CDC, NIA, and even the center we have here too, Buratai Center for Security Studies. Because all the research institutes and the outcome of those research institutes never find their way into research output in terms of policy making and policy decision. The second thing that is our major problem here, and which is going to make, if I can predict, extremism difficult to find solution to, is simply the policy of publishing in international journals. This need has made most research outputs by scholars, even within Nigeria, unreachable, both for their students and the policymakers. We prefer solutions to Nigerian problems in journals as far away as Germany and Norway. Meanwhile, the policymakers who ought to make use of this research output as part of the policies to solve present social problems are here in Nigeria. And so we have a disconnect between the findings of social research, which is geared toward solving Nigerian problems, including extremism, and policymakers that are not even informed concerning our problems. And that is why it is easy for somebody in America to discuss Nigerian problems very, very well with us and even prefer solutions, because the researches that emanate from our scholars are published in their journals and not even in Nigerian journals. My final submission, my 10 minutes is up, is that there is no dearth of intelligentsia whose contribution can provide solutions into the various crises besetting the nation. We don't have any dearth about them. We have more than enough, and more than enough research social science output have actually been done. What we lack simply is the means of collecting all these insights and utilizing them as policy inputs so that we can have policy outputs that are geared towards credible and tested solutions to our problems. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Agara. You can see the magisterial delivery of a seasoned social scientist there. Let me quickly play the devil's advocate for those in the chat room. Someone asked Professor Igbinedion how it will be possible to end extremism in 6 months, and Professor Igbinedion replied him there, and I think we should have the benefit of what he says. He said that given the political will and application of standard toolkit, that it can be done. That he cited the case of the Good Friday Accord in Northern Ireland between the Irish rebels and the British government, which led to peace that they still enjoy to this day. That I think what he's trying to say is that if you are ready to mobilize in the direction of mass education, Cuba became a fully literate country within 1 year, 1959 to 1960, through mass education. And you skill all those Almajiri kids that Boko Haram is recruiting, then they will not have any supply line to continue with the insurgency. Because as many of who has had to exit for other important pressing engagements, is that does she think that female intervention in countering extremism in a patriarchal, male-dominated environment like our own country, Lebanon, and Syria, is the best approach? I don't think she implied that in her delivery. She only said that she followed the protocols expected of a woman in that kind of environment. Wear your hijab, make sure you are properly covered before approaching the extremists in the prisons, who are mostly male. So male couldn't have it. But I just to recognize the presence of our media partners. I should have said that at the beginning. Njenje Media TV is a major Nigerian TV network in the United Kingdom, and Ben TV, which gave me the privilege in 2009 to speak in London, is the one around which the Black community revolve around. They are streaming this live, and I really want to thank and I also want to thank Mr. Aliste Shoyode, the CEO of Ben TV. Both of we are very grateful to you. And to everyone who are itching to make contribution, we cannot afford the opportunity. Another opportunity will come. I will now hand over to my Vice Chancellor for his closing. I will now hand over to my Vice Chancellor for his closing remarks. Vice Chancellor, sir.
Thank you very much, moderator. You all agree with me that it has been a very instructive webinar, and the guest speakers have really excited our imaginations and thought queues in the areas of managing extremism. Let me just quickly highlight some of the insightful contributions that have come out from today's discussion. One that stands tall is education. All the speakers have emphasized the need for mass education and to change the narrative. Education is a mandatory requirement for peaceful coexistence. It is also a mandatory requirement for conflict resolution, and it's a mandatory requirement for demystifying every form of extremism. We have also found out from presentations today that the academia has a very important role to play. We need to expand our peace-building curricula in the universities beyond the concept of general studies. In higher institutions like ours, nothing stops us from establishing peace awards for students, for leaders on campus. With this, we should be entrenching in them the principles and the philosophy of peace building and peaceful coexistence. I'm really excited by the presentation of Professor Sai Pariksha, yeah. You see, in his presentation, he provided for us 6 pillars of peace. And one of them that really caught my attention was goodwill. We often underrate the power of goodwill. In the presence of goodwill, there's community coexistence. When you express goodwill amongst your neighborhood, there probably will not be need for conflict. The other aspect that came up to one of the pillars he mentioned was tolerance, the word that has been overflowed, but it's not in implementation. So we need to begin to synthesize some of the outcomes of this presentation and put them in practice. Community engagement. Professor General Gambazo talked about the percentage of conflict resolution in terms of mechanism and strategy and practice. 80% community, 20% military. We cannot overemphasize the need for community involvement and engagement in conflict resolution. Let me also mention One aspect that did not come up in any of the papers, but is also an important instrument for use and must also be a topic of discussion in the university curricula. Ability to meet social contract. Failures in meeting social contract have often led to different degrees of extremism. This is also associated with great expectation. Once you make promises, please keep them. If you don't keep them, then you are inviting some form of extremism. Research is important, but research is only significant when it is incorporated into policy implementation of a nation or a community. Like Professor Gara said, there's no scarcity of social science related research in peace building or conflict resolution, or even in demystifying extremism. The point is that some of these very, very important research have been left in the coolers and the cupboards and the wardrobes and the libraries. They need to be dusted, brought out of the shelves, and given to government for implementation. It is important to begin to use our research work. We have heard about so many Nigerians that are playing vital roles in the development of different countries in the globe. This is because their works, their research output, their intelligence, their intellectual wealth were brought to bear and incorporated in those countries' policies. We should do the same in Nigeria. Very distinguished participants, I want to believe that we put together the compendium of today's presentation, synthesize some of the salient points that we have had today, and make a submission to the relevant organs of this country for possible further dialogue and see how they can become policy statements to counter insurgency, extremism in our country. Thank you very much. The webinar is now officially closed. Thank you.